So FYI, you'll have to say yes to that prompt. And welcome to the GO-Biz Drought and Winter Storm Grant Application webinar hosted by yours truly. My name is Amber Schott. I'm a wildfire resilience with the Community Alliance with Wildfire Resilience Specialist with the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. I'm rapidly becoming just a general climate disaster specialist. Just so you know, I do have a background in soil health and water quality. So all of these topics are near and dear to my heart, and I've been working in ag for about 15 years. So hopefully can pivot some of that knowledge and skills to help folks understand what's going on with this grant opportunity through the state and get you some critical funding for recovery and long-term viability. So feel free to share your name, maybe where you're located, and maybe what you're up to, why you're here today. Like if you're a technical provider and you're hoping to learn more about helping other people, or if you are an interested applicant. And then that way, it's a nice, small, intimate group. That way we just kind of have a sense of each other. For those that are just now joining, just some basic housekeeping is, if you're not talking, monitor your mic. I'll try to do my best too, since I've got some crazy doggies over here. But yeah, some group agreements, just respect each other if you're gonna speak and call folks forward. I use she, her pronouns, but I actually really don't care. So if you get it wrong, that's okay. But that's important to some folks. So feel free to also share that if it is useful to you. Okay, at this 5 o'clock time frame, I think we'll get started. So I'm going to screen share. Feel free to give me like verbal or notes in the chat, because otherwise I probably can't see you while I'm screen sharing. So just let me know that you can see all this good stuff. All right. And I'm going to try to minimize this bar so it doesn't block your view. Here we go. Okay. Is that working for folks?
Looks good.
Groovy. Thank you. All right. So I'll just start with like a quick overview that this is not an emergency fund run by CAFF, as is often the case lately. This is money through the state, through the small business office and the governor's office. And we did advocate for some of this money to be earmarked for small and underserved farmer groups. So that's sort of why we are helping with the technical assistance and outreach for this opportunity. So that being said, just an FYI that the middle person between GO-Biz and us is Lendistry, and they are the ones that are powering the website and the application. And we've been on some calls with them the last 5 weeks or so to sort of see what the process is, weigh in on some of the eligibility criteria, and then also hopefully, understand as best we can to help applicants through this process. So that's just sort of a baby caveat to y'all, so that you understand we have a little bit of limitation when it comes to the back end and understanding how this stuff is hosted and works, but we'll do our best to make sure you get connected to the right people who are in charge of those components. Before I move on, any questions about that or my role or why we're doing this? Cool. I also shamelessly called out that we have 2 of our Spanish TA providers that we subcontracted with on the call today too, in case you know other folks who want to access this opportunity but don't speak English. So Stephanie Stevens from FarmLink and Tessa Salzman is a contractor through CAFF. So feel free to ping them as well through the chat or whatnot, or we've got some their info at the very end of the slide as well. So without further ado, we got to crank through this. There are a fair amount of slides, so let me just make sure I've got control of the wheel. Voila. Okay. So just a quick overview. We will talk about the purpose of the grant, the application window, and then the big lift here in understanding, I think, is eligibility for both the drought and the flood, because they are different. There are some technology requirements and recommendations that we'll review as well with folks, which can be quite tricky if you're going to be doing this from your phone. So we'll talk about some of that. but there's some requirements in terms of like the identification verification process. So we'll talk about persona, which is a third party verification of the identity of the applicant. We'll talk about briefly just how to set up an account if you do meet the minimum eligibility criteria so you can move forward. And then also, you know, some of the specs on that, like password recovery, all that good stuff. There is also, I apologize, this is a slightly out of order agenda since I updated my slides, but the required documentation piece will come right after eligibility too, because you might be eligible, but maybe you don't have the right documentation ready. So you'll really want to know about that piece as well. There's a bank verification process that we'll talk about because it's a little bit triggering for folks, but there is another third-party entity called Plaid, and it's similar to things like Venmo, but basically it will verify that you are the same person that you identify as, and it's linked to your bank account, and that is in fact a business account. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then also the privacy and security around those third-party components. So any questions with the overview? Okay. Silence means yes. All right. Ooh, let's try this. Okay. So just an FYI, these are not necessarily slides I created myself. I adapted some of them from content that's produced by Lendistry. They're very excited to have things sort of standardized. So what I want to call out on this slide in particular is that there are several different groups of funding that are happening through this opportunity. We are only providing TA support around Drought Group 1 and Flood Group 1. And the reason for that is because those are the two groups of, you know, buckets of money that are earmarked for small and underserved farmers, or what they're calling socially disadvantaged farmers. So we'll talk about the criteria and what those definitions are, but the qualified small business piece is something that they determined based on, you know, annual gross income. And so we'll get into that in just a second here, but I just wanted to flag that those are the only two groups that we are a part of in terms of the TA, but there will be additional opportunities for folks maybe that don't qualify. Like if you make too much money to qualify for the small group, then you might try for the group 2 or group 3 that comes a little bit later this year or early next year. Any questions about that? I'm just going to ask that every time. Okay. Ooh, just keep. Here we go. All right. So Drought is arguably probably the more complicated one. So although I'm not going to do a poll of the number of folks that are here, if you're interested in the Drought one, the most important thing you need to know is that you have to fall within a Drought 2 severity or higher classification. And you can kind of see on the map there is a place where you plug in your address on the application website, and it will tell you which drought classification you're in. So do not do any work until you do that, because if you don't qualify, you know, for your zone, there's no point in moving forward, which I know is very sad because you still may have drought impacts, but if you're not in the 2 and higher threshold, then you're not eligible for this per the limitations that are set up on the governor's side of things. So but let's back up and just talk about what is small and socially disadvantaged. Small in this case is anyone who is making under 350K in their annual gross tax return and documentation, as well as has less than 100 employees for the years that you have to show that for. So it can be, you know, a sole proprietorship. It can be a nonprofit. So there's a couple different designations that are allowed. And if you have questions about whether or not, you know, you qualify, this is a good place to just check. This is all listed on the website as well on that first. When you go to the landing page, you choose, you know, drought or flood. And this is some of the first information that you'll encounter. But so socially disadvantaged, probably y'all have heard this term before. It's debated amongst many, you know, justice groups, but basically we're looking at folks who have historically been underserved or discriminated against. So that can be any of the folks who identify as BIPOC, women, women X, veterans. So just, it is a honor system, I suppose, in terms of how you identify for this regard, but that's just something to flag as well. Any thoughts or questions around that? Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
I am not socially disadvantaged. I am definitely a small scale farmer. I was definitely affected by the floods this last year. I am continually definitely affected by the drought. Am I going to be competitive because I am not socially disadvantaged, because I am not a woman, because I don't meet any of the criteria for justice, but I grow food?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked that. So in this case, the idea is that their terminology here is maybe not great. It means small or socially disadvantaged. So if you're a small producer by those standards that we just mentioned, then you should still qualify. And the idea is that you might still be above maybe that cap, like the 350 cap, but if you're a socially disadvantaged, identifier, then you could still qualify. The flip side to that is that if you weren't eligible under either of those, then you could apply for the other groups that I mentioned that will open a little bit later, like after October 31st.
Okay. Well, I'm small. I fit under that cap for sure. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, great question. I'll also just sort of mention here, I already came across one person who does pollination services, and they had, questions about operating just as a DBA, which is, doing business as. And so even under these other criteria here, like, you need to be 18 years of age, you need to have your operation, since 2019, right? That sort of thing. You could still qualify. You just have to show some sort of documentation that shows that you had started your, org in California or your business in California, but by that time frame. So, but good question. Yeah. I'll just say here too, obviously there are different types of forms that folks have for their taxes. So if you don't have like a Schedule F for some reason and you need help locating, your annual gross, we can talk about that. Actually, what I'm going to do is escape from this presentation for just a second and show you some of the things that they look at when they're assessing what qualifies as gross cash farm income. So let me just pull this up real quick here. Can everybody see that? Maybe not. Not yet. Yeah, let me go to. Okay. So this is straight from the website, as I've mentioned, but here are some of the items that they look at. So crop and livestock sales are included, government payments, other farm-related income. So maybe you do, breeding services or something like that. And then any of these other components down here is a no. This is confusing only because government payments says yes, but that's under like revenue to the farm. So maybe this is like the landlord has some sort of program with EQIP or something, and they're getting some sort of government payment from EQIP, but they're the landlord and you're the leasee. You don't have to include that. Does that make sense? So just so that you're clear that those are two different types of government payments that they're referring to there. All right. That being said, the drought one is on a tiered system. So I'm just going to scroll down here so you understand. One of the reasons they're asking for 2019 taxes through 2022 is so that you can show at least a 10% loss. I know that can be challenging for a number of people, but for some folks, maybe it's really obvious. Maybe you made a lot less because of the drought impacts. So if you meet the 10% minimum, you're going to be in this first tier, which is 20,000. So there's actually quite a lot of money available, even if you only had 10% loss. We know that some folks had a lot more than that. So that's the idea here, is that the higher your loss, the more you're eligible to receive in this grant program, which is great because it's not too often that this big a chunk of money comes around for folks. So just have that in mind, that 30% loss or more, up to 40, rather 39.99 is 60,000, and so on and so forth. For 50% and higher, it's 100,000. So that's the cap. And that is just so that you understand, like, why you only got 20 or why you only got 60. Any questions around that? Okay. The required documentation, I could pop back into the slides, but I'll just go here because this is kind of useful for folks, I think. It says everything right here, but there are some specifics around all these requirements. And so, for example, like we said, you need your 2019 and 2022 federal tax returns to be completed, unaltered, and already filed. Some folks haven't filed yet, but maybe are going to file in the next month or so. And since the application window is open through October the 31st, I would say, like, keep that in mind. So if you want to get it done and then get your app in, there's still time. Otherwise, I'll just shamelessly plug right now that if for some reason you can't qualify for this effort, both the drought or flood, CAFF also received some flooding money from the state, and we'll be running some CUSP drought money as well in January of 2024. So if for whatever reason you don't qualify here, swing back around and come talk to us in January. I'll also flag here under proof of employee count, you can use the W-3 if you have that, or payroll records. But if you're using payroll records, please redact any personal information like social security numbers and things like that. I've also encountered one applicant already who has who uses a contract labor force, and so they have other types of documentation that prove the seasonal employees that they hire for harvest. And that will also suffice for showing that you're under the 100 cap. Any questions about that? Okay. Let's cruise out of this again and get back into the PowerPoint. Let's go to the one that's big. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna have to keep moving my little screen around. There we go. Okay, nice and clean, the way we like it. Any questions just about general eligibility, these definitions that are being used, or anything like that at this time?
Hi, Kobush here, Ojai, California. Thank you so much. I actually did a deep dive of this right before the webinar, so I'm excited to get some more info. In terms of eligibility, I had an interesting thing happen where I had contracts lined up at the end of 2019, and there was cancellation. I've been working with I worked with the SBA on that. There was nothing reported, but there were contracts in place. And this might be maybe something I have to go directly to the state about. But I can show a loss in business opportunity and contractual opportunity based off of climatic conditions. And I think that this is going to come up more and more, specifically with my line of ag work. So that was just something I wanted to plug early on right now with eligibility, and maybe we can have an offline question, but perhaps there are other growers or ranchers who had potential things lined up that fell through based off of the conditions.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think we had provided some feedback on these early partner calls that sometimes it's difficult to demonstrate these types of impacts and losses. So the more documentation you have, even if it's not necessarily what's outlined here on the website under the eligibility or the required documentation, I think it's great to submit that. And like I just mentioned, this gal who does pollination services, right? She doesn't have the business license because she doesn't need to have it, but she's still a legitimate operator. And so that's what she'll be providing in lieu of the other required documentation. So I think that you're right on, Cole, about utilizing whatever evidence you have to make your case. I think that sadly, I'll just say that we're supposed to have access to the back end of this, so we could kind of run you through like a pretend application and do kind of a step-by-step, but it's not ready for the TA partners yet to access. So we don't get to do that today, but presumably, as they were telling me, there's a place for folks to add explanations to the documents that they are submitting. So when you scan that into a PDF format and want to upload it, I would include some sort of explanation why you're including that documentation. So that's just my tip there.
Thank you so much. Well, it's good to know that they are accepting additional supplementation materials and documentation, and they'll take the time to review that, because in some they're like, you have to have this, and if you don't have this, and they won't look at anything else. But this is really helpful, because I could definitely provide, letters from potential clients that we had proposals in place that were pre-approved, that kind of thing. So that's really helpful. And any feedback you want to give back to the folks here, I think that's like 2 thumbs up for us, who can show that we did have things lined up, but they fell out because of exactly why this grant is being granted. So,
yeah, it's a good point. The narrative component, even though obviously they have a lot of hard metrics for quantitative assessment, is still a valuable piece to your story. So and there's a couple other considerations that we'll talk about too as we're moving through some of this documentation, because as you just mentioned, there are some workarounds for when you don't have the exact thing, or you're not comfortable with like the third-party verification process or something like that. So we'll get into that too, but thanks for flagging that. Any other questions before we move on? I'll actually just go ahead and do it, because the next one is just sort of this review again. This applicant certification piece, it's actually just like a fillable PDF that you can open up off that main landing page for each grant type. It is only available in English. It is a legally binding document where you're basically attesting to the criteria. And so there's, I want to say 15, actually. Here, let me just see if I can show you. I have to get out of this completely real quick, but this is what the certification document looks like. And it's basically like you agree, that you're executing the truth of these statements, that you are at least 18 years old, and all the standard lovely legal jargon. Here's the component.
Amber, we can't see the document that you're talking about, but do you want me to just put the link into the chat so folks can pull it up?
Oh, sure. That's interesting that you can't see it. Let me just make sure. You can do either one. So let me just do this. So whatever folks are more comfortable with. Does that work? Y'all see it now? Okay.
There you
Great.
go.
Sorry. So here you go. Round 2, scrolling. Again, this is through Lendistry, the third party that is the intermediate between Cal OSPA and GO-Biz. But basically, this is just because you are still providing documentation, right? Like your W-3 that says like, yeah, I have under 100 or fewer employees. But that's just like, see how it's fillable, and you would just like put your initials right there. So for those on the call who may be TA providers, this is only in English, unlike the website, which does have several language options. So we were talking through this today with our other contractors about, if you are able to read this to your client or something they understand, then they can still, initial, or they can also call the customer service line, and I'll provide that as well several times throughout the presentation. But that's another way that they can get language support to understand what this document says before they sign it. Any thoughts about that? Questions? Okay. It's much the same for the flood one, but I'm going to jump back into the presentation here and show y'all that part of it. Okay. What else? Yeah, moving forward. Let's talk about flood. So it's very similar, except you don't need, in this particular case, to meet the socially disadvantaged criteria, just the qualified small business criteria. You also only need to have your 2022 tax return, not through 2019, because obviously the recent winter storm impacts were mostly winter of 2022 and early 2023. We did just find out today, sadly, that originally they had told us that folks who hadn't filed yet for their 2022 tax returns could still apply, and that they would sign similar to this other attestation document, something that just says, yeah, I suspect I'm going to qualify as a small business, and I have proof of my under 100 full-time employees, and I'm good to go. But today they told us you do in fact have to have your 2022 tax return completed. So somewhat back to my early comment about, if you haven't done that yet, if you suspect you can do it in the next month or so, you'll still have time to apply before the October 31st deadline. However, if you do not fall within these blue polygons across the state, you don't qualify anyway. So the 5 counties that are not eligible are listed there. And that's because of how the governor declared official disaster zones. We also provided feedback to Lendistry at the time that this was all being built, that it's a bit problematic to frame this only as flooding impact, as we know that a lot of folks had other types of winter storm impacts, like high winds that damage high tunnels or things like that. So we are still getting clarity about whether those types of impacts are going to be eligible, because the way that the language is written, it's very flood centric. But I would say don't let that discourage you from applying, because we are strongly making the case on your behalf if you happen to kind of fall in this other category where, like, maybe you didn't have direct flooding issues, but you had a lot of other related storm impacts. Any questions about that piece of it?
I don't have a question. I have a comment though.
Sure.
So we had a lot of flood damage. And I got an email from the state of California, my CDFA, I don't remember who it was from at this point, but it was like, hey, if you had flood damage, take some photos of the damage, fill out this form. It was a very simple form, and then apply for some relief. So I did. And luckily, it wasn't a complicated form. Otherwise, I would be pretty pissed off about it. About 3 weeks later, I got the result. This is a highly competitive grant, and you didn't make the grade. So I took the time to take the photos, to fill out the form, to do everything that the state wanted me to do to get this relief, and it was a waste of time. So here we are again. And I'm looking for relief again. And I don't feel like I'm going to be competitive, even though I meet the criteria, and I don't have any confidence in the process. Are you doing anything different, or is there enough money available in this bucket so that I don't have to worry about it? I'll go offline to hear your answer.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. There's that scenario is sadly quite common across a lot of the folks that we worked with over the winter storms. What I'll say about that is that even the emergency fund that we ran, it was a drop in the bucket, right? It was maybe $280K that went out the door to like 50 people. And there were over 200 applicants, right? So in that case, you're right. There's just not enough money to go around. And so the ranking criteria on our side is pretty simple, but often your percent loss to your income ratio is the thing that gives you the biggest point spread. So let's say you only make 50,000 a year, but you had like 100,000 in damages, right? You're way over the 100% loss. And so if you're over 100% loss, you're automatically going to get bumped to the top of the ranking. So this is a little tricky for folks. I'm not sure, Ed, if you want to articulate which particular grant you were applying to. I would say that actually any documentation of any damages is always useful for insurance purposes. So don't let that dissuade you. You should want to basically do that anyway for your own records and, you know, your ability to articulate your situation. So I'm glad you have that because it hopefully will be helpful in the future. But yeah, I'm not sure if that helps you understand maybe sometimes why their ranking is the way it is, but absolutely in this particular case, there's a lot more money available. So you might be more competitive than you think.
May I step in as just a comrade producer? Hi, Ed. I feel you, and I'm so sorry for the hardships. I'm with you in solidarity. In my experience here in Ventura County, I'd be interested in knowing what county you're in. We've had a tremendous understaffing at our FSA office, and so they were not able to do the required site visits to actually see what was what. And by the time that they had staffed, I mean, we were well into the season, things had dried up and we had already had to start repairing things and such. So I understand those difficulties. However, in trying to remedy that, it seems as though that they eventually bolstered support at the office. My question to you is, A, what county are you in? And also, do you have a good relationship with your FSA contact, your office? Because she knows me by first name and I'm hitting her up all the time. So she can walk me through the process and ensure that my application, my information is on point. That to me has been the most valuable thing in being able to receive any support and relief, because I believe you can get it. You just have to be on them, and that unfortunately is quite a bit of a job.
Well, answer your question, it's Santa Barbara County, and no, I don't have a personal relationship with the FSA office, although I'm pretty well known throughout the county.
I got the name and number of the gal you need to talk to in Santa Maria. We should connect offline, but I think that that's relevant to any other producer out here, is actually really becoming allies with your local FSA office, because they're the ones, that's their job to make sure that we know what we need to put in and to really help us get through the process. Ed, I look forward to connecting with you.
Yeah, and I'll just plug too, the RCDs are super plugged into those things too. So if you're not already connected with your local RCD staff, they often are segues between FSA and NRCS. So we probably owe beers if we're not defining our acronyms, but the Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So definitely, reach out to any of us here at Ed for additional information. But it's good to mention too right now that yes, this is a first come first serve grant. And just on Tuesday, the Lendistry staff told us that they had 200 applications. However, of those 200 applications, 60% of them were incomplete. So either they're going to get declined or they have 5 days from their decline status to address whatever gaps are in there, whether they're missing a document or they didn't fill something out properly or whatnot. So I'm going to jump back into the presentation, but keep these thoughts and whatnot coming, because this is good stuff. I appreciate y'all. Okay, sorry. Screen share first. Back to it. Here we go. Okay. Let me just hide that again. Okay. Everybody good? Back to seeing the full shebang? Sorry,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Auditory confirmation. All right, so if there's no additional questions on that eligibility part for flooding, we will move on to the required documentation. It's very similar to what was on the drought one. minus, of course, you know, that there's just this 2022 instead of 2019 federal tax return form. Similar, again, you know, the employee count, and just making sure that you have a government issued ID and you do this attestation document. So slightly easier for flood, slightly, because you don't have to show that 10% loss. So I'll just mention now, it's a flat rate. If you qualify for flooding, regardless of what percent loss, it's 25K. Okay. If there aren't any other questions about that, we'll jump into some more like technical stuff, and I'll kind of go through this quickly because I think most folks know about this and I don't want to burn too much time. I'd rather like this discussion stuff in scenarios is actually much more, I think, relevant to y'all and helpful, but you're welcome to correct me if that's not true and you really want to know how to clear your cache. But you do want to kind of have like a clean slate when you're ready to apply if you do meet the criteria. So what I would say about that at this point is just definitely use Chrome because that's what they're recommending. So if you don't already have that on your phone or on your laptop, etc., download Chrome. To clear the cache, it is pretty simple. That's just data that's stored on, you know, from websites or other things that you've been, you know, browsing on. And so it's pretty easy to just go up to the top right corner and like ask for it to clear that so that you can start fresh. Another great way to do that, and in addition to something they're recommending, is using incognito mode. If no one's familiar with that, I can demonstrate it right now if you'd like to. It's super easy. Any takers? Everyone feel good about how to do incognito? Basically, anytime you're making a new tab on your browser, there's an option on the right hand, vertical three dots, and you can just choose incognito. All right. Disabling pop-up blockers apparently is also an important thing. And so that is something that you'll want to do just to make sure that your experience is pretty smooth. So here are some more step-by-step type things. Again, here's that little vertical three dots, always in that upper right-hand corner. You just select privacy, security, clear browsing data, and move on. Similar for incognito, right? Same idea. Three dots, new window, and this little security Sherlock guy will appear. Then you know you're on the right page. Settings, if you need to disable pop-up blocker, same thing. Go to that little three vertical dots in the upper right, privacy, security, site settings, pop-ups and redirects, and just use the slider bar to blocked. This is more important, actually, I think, than all that stuff, which is if your documents aren't clear and legible, you'll get declined. So don't spend all that time, you know, getting your docs in and then have them like, as they're showing here, like at a weird angle or like with a strange background or something like that. You can use, of course, like these different apps on your phone for scanning. You cannot submit JPEGs of your like legal docs, like your tax returns and stuff. So if you didn't get those already, like from the government directly in a PDF, you'll want to make them into a PDF file. The only thing that's allowed to be submitted that's not a PDF format is your government issued ID. You can just take a photo of that as long as it's a JPEG and it's under 15 megabytes. What I will say is that they told me that the image that you have, like I already have a picture of my driver's license front and back for a variety of reasons, but they said if the image itself is more than 6 months old, then you need to take a new one, which seems a little, specific, but that's part of this issue is that this is big money and they have had a lot of fraud and it's state money. So this is like one of their, security features when you're going to get to that step where you're uploading your government issued ID. And that can be a state ID, it can be a driver's license, or it could be a passport. If it's one of the state ID or driver's license, you need to have front and back. Any questions about that? Okay. Email addresses. This is an interesting one. I live at a farm and their business address starts with info@. So they would have to use a different email, even though that's their business email, because the system that Lendistry has, for whatever reason, does not recognize it. This is kind of annoying, but if you have any questions, you can make like a, a temporary Gmail or Yahoo account or whatever you want to do in order to make sure that you have a valid email for this system. I know this is also challenging sometimes if we're working with growers who don't use email, and sometimes like TA providers will use their own email, but that is definitely not ideal here. You basically want to set them up with a valid email address of their own, even if they're maybe not going to use it, beyond this process. Any questions about that? Just obviously, I think these ones that the contact.com or no reply is just because they won't go through and they tend to be kind of spammy. So, all right, we'll move on. Let's talk about persona. It is again, like I mentioned, a third-party verification. So after you upload your driver's license, state ID, or passport, you actually have to take a selfie using a device that has a front-facing camera. And that can be your laptop or it can be your phone or whatnot, but it has to have that front-facing device. And then you will basically get the prompts to, maybe some folks have done this before, right? Where you have to like put your face in the oval and then turn left or right type thing. So make sure you have good lighting, that, you're standing hopefully in a place that doesn't have a super busy background. Don't, use flash or flare or anything like that. The other thing is that this is a pretty critical step. I'm going to show you the next slide because it shows you kind of with a graphic some of the issues here. This is what it'll look like when you upload your ID. Like I said, if you have a driver's license, you need to do front and back. And then this is what persona looks like. It makes you turn, like you start facing forward, then you have to go left, then right. And apparently this order is very important because what this app does is it matches it to the ID that you've just uploaded. If you're like me, your hair color changes every 6 months. So this could be a little bit challenging. And they told me that some folks have been declined because they couldn't pass this step. So it's just super critical to focus on trying to meet these parameters as much as possible. If you don't get this green check mark, that means it didn't verify. It was not able to match to whatever ID you uploaded. And so then you'll you'll get an email that says you've been declined for this reason, and you'll have 5 days to appeal, which is not much. So we felt really strongly about this. I'm not sure why that 5-day component is in there, but presumably you should have till the end of the application period to, review and try again. But just flagging that this is a pretty important step in the process. Does anyone have questions or concerns about this? Okay. Moving on. Additionally, if you are going to set up a application, you have to go through this whole create an account. So there are these security questions in case you forget your password. I've already encountered one person who forgot their password because they just don't use computers that much, and their daughter was helping them and maybe created a password that was hard for them to remember or something like that. There is support through the customer service line, but there's also account recovery actions that you can take. And we'll go through that as well. It shows you how to like troubleshoot a lock that may occur on your account. So probably folks are pretty familiar with this when you set up, a bank access or something like that. There's security questions, so it's all pretty standard. Any thoughts about that? Okay. So let's presume that you're in and you're ready to go. This is obviously an older image, but it is open, and there is this whole document available to you as well that you can get from the homepage, and you can just download it. Their FAQ page is supposed to go live either tomorrow at close of business or like possibly Monday. So just you can keep checking the website for that FAQ. That's just basically like these common issues that folks are encountering. So we are continuing to monitor these issues and provide feedback to our relationship managers and stuff like that. So hopefully we can still advocate for these sort of different scenarios that folks are encountering. But that's where you go to start your application. It's pretty simple, all the same stuff that they typically ask you for, right? Name, phone number, email. That's where you'll create your password. You'll get a confirmation code to your phone. And it comes like from actually, I was going to look this up on my own because we tried doing this ourselves just so we would have like a frame of reference for what folks were going to encounter. And I was a little bit surprised by the text that I got because it was called Ping Pong for Good. So if you get some weird verification code, it's coming from Ping Pong for Good, but it says your Lendistry verification code is blah, 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 and it's a 6-digit code. So any thoughts or questions about that? Okay. This is probably what everyone wants to know. Who's reviewing my stuff and what does it mean? So basically they are, like I said, on a first come, first served basis. Your TA providers are here to help you when you encounter a roadblock. So don't ever be shy about asking us for support if you want shepherding through the process, because we do kind of have the direct ear of our relationship manager. An example here that I liked was, this document and bank information. They actually didn't say this yet, but Plaid is the company that they use to verify that your bank, where the money is going to be deposited directly, because they do not do checks. They actually, you have to, use Plaid to verify your bank account. And so basically it looks at like a couple of transaction histories so it can verify that it's a business account and that it's real and that it is registered to you. But it's similar, like if you use Venmo, you use Plaid. So if you are uncomfortable with that process, there is a workaround, but you have to call the customer service line and say, hey, I don't want to do the Plaid process. I want to verify my bank account some other way. And then they will tell you how you can do that. Sadly, that is not necessarily something we can do on your behalf, just because of this whole fraud thing. Each applicant basically has to enter this stuff on their own, or like, sitting next to a TA provider in person. But anyway, they will evaluate the minimum criteria first. And then if you're eligible, right, then your application goes through validation. And that validation is like the check on your ID, the check on your bank account, the check on your W-3 forms, etc. You can, confirm information over the phone. So if you get like a call possibly about the validation process, you might be able to verify that way. So that is why you enter your phone number into your, when you create an account. Any thoughts or questions about that? You can always check on the status of your application by signing, into the portal and your account. And this is what it will look like. So you'll have like incomplete, like you started one, but you haven't submitted or something like that. This doesn't mean you've been denied. It's just a status saying like, oh, you started it and it's incomplete. Inactive, that's a little bit different. That means like you haven't been in there for 30 days. So yours is getting withdrawn from the process. And this means like before you've submitted, basically. Like if you started one and then it just sat there, then they basically consider it like a null account. And so just something to think about. Once you have submitted it, you'll get an application number, and that number is what's going to help you refer to your status after you've submitted. So make sure you hang on to that. And And then you might have like, you submitted it, but additional documentation is required. So like Cole, you may run into this, right? Where you're saying, hey, I submitted documentation that wasn't exactly what you wanted, but I'm hoping it demonstrates blah, blah, blah. So they might have you call you, right? And be like, hey, thanks for sending that in, but it's not quite enough. Do you have XYZ? Typically this will be like one of the first ones you'll see is like, it's under review for your minimum eligibility requirements. And then if for some reason something is triggered in that process and you don't meet something, they'll tell you it's ineligible, but you still have 5 days from the date of that notification of ineligibility to appeal. So it doesn't mean it's a guarantee of the reversal of that like decision, but you know, you can maybe submit other documents or something like that. So maybe like your, you know, PDF wasn't clear enough or something, and they deny you on that basis. You'll have an opportunity to get back in there and do it again. Sorry, this is blocking that. So yeah, and then this other piece here is just the application meets the minimum, and we'll move to the next validation stage. That's where they're going to deal with all this bank stuff. I flagged this piece in red because again, if you do get declined, you still have 5 days from the notice of that to appeal and again, you know, make your case. So keep that in mind, that you may encounter some of this stuff along the way for whatever reason, and you still have an opportunity to get in there and have a second look at it. If you're awarded, you'll be notified, and they will give you a W-9 through DocuSign's like portal. So that's like, if you've never done DocuSign online, it's pretty easy, but if you need any help with that, just let us know. We're happy to help shepherd folks through that step of it as well. And again, this is all because they don't do any paper checks. Part of that is mail fraud. Mail theft, which we've actually encountered in our own emergency funding process as well. So just sort of flagging that. That's why all this bank verification stuff is critical, is because it's going to be deposited directly into your business account. Yeah, other grant docs, you know, these are basically going to be for your records. You'll need that W-9 when you do your taxes, blah, blah, blah. But all of this stuff is more the tail end. If you're awarded, you know, these bank transfers will you know, come up through Lendistry directly, not through us, the TA provider. So if you have questions about that, again, ask the customer service line. I forgot to mention, I'll just get out of this really fast and share the screen with y'all again, that there is in fact here we go. There's a chat function that you can speak with a live person. Let me see if I can load it again, because I killed the chat bot. Sorry, it's not a bot. It is a live person. And if the people are busy, you can actually schedule something with them instead. So that's another way to get any other support that you might want. There we go. So it looks like this, and you just choose drought or flood, FAQ. If you see FAQ, it's going to tell you like, it's not ready yet. So FYI, not ready yet. But if you do chat with our team, usually you can get a real person, talk to the team now, or schedule a meeting. So just wanted to show you that real quick. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. Any questions about that? I know we're right up against the tail end here, and I'm almost done getting through all this heavy text. But appreciate your...
Hey, Amber, I've got a question I want to get in before we run out of time.
You betcha. FYI, I will stay on the call, but I just, you know, I want to respect your time. So
okay, yeah. This is kind of quick. If we do get the funding, what is the tax treatment? Is this donation? Is this revenue? how we manage it when we submit our tax returns in the following year?
That sadly is a question for Lendistry because they will be the one issuing you this W-9.
Mhm.
So yeah, so sorry, we're not set up to give any tax advice in this case, but yeah, you'll want to work with.
It should be an easy answer though. I mean, when look at the pandemic, you have the forgivable loans, which are basically treated as gifts, they're tax free, and you have or forgivable grants actually, and then you have the loans. I mean, it should be set up already. We should know what the tax treatment is before we receive this money. It should be pretty logical.
I agree. What I will say is that the governor signed another 2-year extension just yesterday on disaster payments. So I think to your point, Ed, that this will not qualify as income. It will be separated out because of the nature of the disaster declaration. Because it's not a loan, it's grant.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
but I'm giving you a cautious reply.
Lendistry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just giving you a cautious reply because we don't handle that portion of it.
I understand. I can talk to them about it. Thank you.
Okay. No, I appreciate your point there though. Okay. All right. So this is just if you get into your thing and you have a problem with your password, this is pretty standard stuff, but just want to let you know that there is a process for requesting support. You can either call the customer service center and like provide your name and your info, and they'll send that to you, or it's pretty simple, like, oh, I need my password, and they'll send you a text, right? And then it's like with any sort of second party check when you like forget your email password or something. So it's very similar and pretty straightforward, but if you want, you can just bypass this portion and go straight to customer service and they'll dig it up for you. Sorry, I'm going to rip through this because we're sort of at the tail end here, but that's just what that process looks like if you go through their unlock steps. All right. Customer Spirit Center, there's the number. They're open 7 to 7 Pacific time. You got my info right there, as well as Stephanie and Tessa, who are on here providing that Spanish TA. I'm going to just escape from this, but if you need that info in an email or something, just hit us up. Mine's super easy, amber@caff.org. And so I'm going to stop sharing that for now, and we can just open it up to Q&A. Apologies for going right here to the end of 7 o'clock. Good chat though. I like when there's a lot of discussion and examples.
Thanks, Amber. I got to blow. I really appreciate it.
Okay, yeah, and feel free to reach out to me directly if you want some support going through that process. Cool. Any other thoughts or questions? Again, this is being recorded for posterity, so if you have thoughts about anything that could help other applicants or questions that we can ask the relationship manager that would help make any of this clearer or more equitable, we are still very much interested in being a squeaky wheel and making sure that folks, can access this money because we advocated for it in the first place. So, yeah.
I guess I'll chime in real quick. They're just positive responses. Granted, I was born in 85, so my tech skills are a certain way, but I have had success with Lendistry during COVID relief, and I think the process is pretty streamlined. There's a lot of steps, but it can work, and so I want to encourage people to just keep on keeping on. It's almost a full-time job just to be on top of these things. But thank you to CAFF. Thank you to, I think Lendistry actually does a great job. And I think we'll actually have a lot of success here. And I hope for the best with our outfit. One question, Amber, or just something to just plug in expectation, unfortunate expectation that we are going to get into another potential flood state with El Nino happening. Is there any way that we actually can queue ourselves up so we don't have to go through application 6 months later after being heavily impacted? Or can we queue ourselves up and say, hey, we're in an area, it could happen? And that's just something that I've been thinking about instead of this reaction. Can we just get ourselves readied before the actual process?
Yeah, that's such a valuable reflection. I think we're also in that kind of like trying to plan instead of just have reactionary phases of funding. Sadly, I think the constraint that we encounter by and large is that the criteria for applicants changes so frequently based on the funding sources. So sometimes it's a community foundation and they only fund their county, and sometimes it's state and they have these like, you know, higher restrictions or and so that's a great question. I think that it comes down to like we have several partners like FarmLink and RCDs and things like that that we are trying to build you know, more front end so we can manage it better when it does happen and like kind of move through it quicker, right? So there's not like that 6-month lag. We're able to do that because we're a slightly smaller org than like a state agency. But yeah, most of the big ships take a long time to turn. So
well, you know,
and
you're the quickest of all of them. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that with CAFF. I'm like, if I get an email from Amber, that's the hot off the press. So thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for this webinar. And for comrades, I gotta sign off before it gets too
Yeah.
dark.
I'll mention just one thing real quickly too, that even though the app closes on the 31st, the technical assistance, you know, on the back end is still there for everybody. So like through December, basically, like if you need support getting, you know, stuff in appeals process. So
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
okay, cool.
Amber, I had
Well,
a
don't
quick-
be shy and reach out via email or phone or whatever works best for you. And yeah, Stephanie's indoctrinating her little one early on this emergency funding support.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I gotta stow away here. But yeah, great questions. Especially to your point, Cole. I think all of the kind of orgs that serve farmers are going to be talking about this more going forward.
Thank you.
Amber, I had a quick question on the flood one. So
Sure,
for
go ahead.
flood, do you need to have been profitable in 2022, or if your farm had started in like 2017 and you're still losing money essentially, do you not qualify? Or
As long as you're under the 350 cap and the 100 employees, it doesn't matter because you actually don't have to show a 10% loss. You just have to have suffered damages. And then if you are awarded, there are some like restrictions on how you can use that money. But yeah, you should be good.
okay, and so for damages, we haven't repaired, like we had a road washout. Do we need to have quotes for that repair because we haven't repaired it yet because we don't have the money? So how does
I don't
that
think you
cover?
have to show that yet. It would just be, you know, meet the minimum eligibility criteria, go through all these other steps, and then have that maybe ready in anticipation of being funded. But you don't. It's like Cole was saying, you know, that can help your case. If you want, you can add that documentation to your, you know, folder of stuff that you submit and provide an explanation. But because you don't have to demonstrate 10% loss like you do with drought across the 2 years, it's a little bit different. And so, yeah, basically, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria and you go through the verification process, you're probably going to get awarded.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, but if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out and we can always, you know, run that up the flagpole and ask our relationship managers for a more nuanced response.
Okay, great, thank you.
Of course. Yeah, no problem. Thanks, y'all. Any last burning questions? Sorry, I don't know who's on the Samsung device, but welcome. If everybody's satisfied, we'll sign it off, and then this recording will be shared with all the participants once it's ready, as well as posted on our Catholics YouTube page. And at a later date, hopefully not too much later, we'll add some Spanish subtitles to that as well for any folks that might want that information that way. Hopefully I didn't miss any questions in the chat. Okay. Oh, hi, Mohammed. Welcome. So if you, yeah, we should chat offline because I know I'm already helping you through your process. So thanks for joining. Okay, cool. Thanks, y'all. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.